Good evening and welcome to this month's chapter meeting of the ISPI of Hampton Roads. I'm Scott Weersing, Director of Programs, and we're going to be talking about the Performance Improvement Maturity Model tonight. So we'll just kind of get right into it. If I can find the right. All right, the Performance Maturity Model 10 years later. So my name is Scott Weersing. I work for the Coast Guard as an instructional system specialist. Prior to that, I worked at Truist Bank and senior impact analyst working on the reporting for the corporate university. I was on the vendor side, GP Strategies, Director of Learning Analytics, where I tried to convince companies to invest in evaluation and measurement. And prior to that, I was CVS Health, worked as an advisor, evaluation measurement. And even prior to that, as a performance consultant. So I've been thinking about performance improvement and where we are for a long time. So this presentation again kind of has kind of three kind of key objectives. We're going to review some changes to the performance improvement maturity model, what's happened since I did this presentation back in 2015 in San Antonio, Texas at the ISPI conference. We're going to look at some different scenarios, assess some different sample organizations level maturity, and then hopefully at the end of this, you can describe your current organization or organization you've been part of, and we can figure out where they would fit on the maturity model scale. So that's kind of the objectives for tonight's meeting. So where were we 11 years ago? I went back and tried to figure out, what's changed 10, 11 years ago since 2015. Some things have changed, not much. I was kind of surprised about things. So back in 2015, 2016, we were chasing some bright and shiny objects. What do you think? What do you think some of them might have been? What do you think some of the hot topics in learning and development were back in 2015, 2016?
Engagement.
Engagement. Okay, that's good. That's good to hear. Uh-huh.
Just guessing
What
like
do you think?
automation tools.
Automation tools. Okay. Vance or Marcia, do you remember anything that was a bright and shiny object back in 2015?
Asynchronous was just starting in my world. Of course, it blossomed or exploded in the COVID scenario, but that's what I remember.
Oh yeah, that was again virtual training or via. It wasn't Teams that didn't even exist back then, but yeah, that whole virtual training thing. That was some of that was already mature and some of it was new. But yeah, that really took off. That was a big thing in 2020 when everybody was working from home.
And
Yeah,
change.
and I think some of the things that they were talking about also was just the fact that the hands-on training, experiential, and the snippets of learning.
Yeah. So I went back to kind of my colleagues and asked them because they were in the trying to chase the bright and so here were the things that were really big in 2015. There was a big push for mobile learning. People were going to learn on their phones. They thought that was a new technology. That didn't obviously take off. I don't think any of us are learning that much on our phones. Informal learning was a big new buzzword. AR and VR was taking off, and I think that's still around, but it's not really ubiquitous. It's not everywhere. Gamification was new, where you got points for completing things and learning. Collaborative learning, micro learning. It's like, oh, we're gonna do everything in people are gonna learn with bite-sized chunks when there's free time. But I don't think that took off. Personalization, that was still big, and it's still kind of big now, where there's some idea that the LMS will tell you exactly what you need to learn. And again, these were some of the trends that we're chasing there. And the reason I kind of bring this up is just, the more things change, the more they don't. So what are we chasing now? That's the kind of the question. What do you think is distracting organizations from performance improvement are actually focusing on outcomes. I found this interesting picture. If you give an executive a shiny object, it's a kind of a spoof of a book. If you give a mouse a cookie, then they'll want this and they'll want that. And I thought it was pretty interesting that executives always would rather chase a shiny object than chase outcomes. But what are some of the what's some of the technology organizations trying to implement now?
Real-time AI learning.
That's a big one. Uh-huh. What's big in your world, Vance? What's the new technology you guys are trying to chase down?
Well, so in my world of the military, we're about 10 years behind. We're trying right now to implement LMSs with competency-based training. So it's kind of a new word in some corners, but in many cases, it's just task-based piece part training all over again in a different format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are kind of some of the things. So I wanted to share. Donald Taylor does the global sentiment survey where he kind of asks people what are the hot topics this year, and it's pretty interesting because he's been doing it for 13 years now. And here's the responses from 3,797 people, 105 countries. What items are hot? And so AI is obviously one of the big ones. That reskilling, upskilling, personalization. Hey, we saw that one. It's kind of gone up, but again, if you look at all these percentages are fairly small. There isn't really any giant hot topic, but these are all the key buzzwords, and they kind of go up and down. My favorite is learning analytics, and it's ninth now. It used to be fifth. I think that's what the numbers at the end means. So it kind of shifts at things. Learning experience platforms, all these other things are in there. It's always a fun, interesting list of all these things that are going to try to improve learning and development across organizations. I do like that showing values is moved up from that's kind of interesting. And number 6, consulting more deeply with the business. So the ones that we try to follow that are kind of tried and true that aren't buzzwords. So this is kind of fascinating. Anything on this list that stands out or surprising to you guys?
There's one more that's pretty common these days. It's college versus skills.
What do you mean college versus skills?
Traditionally, a college degree has been a requirement for many different positions, and there's a very strong argument out there that you should focus on skills, not degrees.
Yeah, I had that in my list. I think it's called skills-based talent management rather than
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
degree-based management. Yeah, but yeah, so it'll be interesting. So I'm always fascinated by this of what things are moving up and down in global sentiment. Anybody else have any surprises from or comments about this list?
Apprentice programs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that could be in the other category at the bottom. It's like people he provides the list and asks people to rate him because he's trying to build previous ratings. So there's probably new ones. That's why it's always like interesting. Like, well, new ones aren't going to come up unless enough people signify that.
I think the other issue. Sorry, go ahead, Marcia.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Marcia.
I wanted to say that what I've also noticed is some of the learning, and it probably falls in some of these, are actual generic training that really doesn't match what you're doing, but it's close enough.
Yeah.
So I've noticed that it's the off the shelf training that I've seen now is pretty big.
Yeah. The opposite of personalization would be generic for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, that's not really hot, but again, that's probably the opposite of. It'd be interesting to ask the survey, what are you actually doing? What do you want to be doing? This is probably what we wish we were doing, would be working on these things. And probably, what you're actually working on is probably the tried and true, like you said, generic training, or sometimes it's even compliance training. I've heard that too.
I think there's two other things, Scott. One is budgets. There's a lot of pressure on budgets, and often the learning department is hit more than other departments. And secondly, speed. The world's gotten much faster, and a lot of traditional learning departments can't move fast enough to meet the needs of the customers in the organization.
Yes. So what if we prioritize continuous improvement and performance improvement instead of chasing all these bright and shiny objects? What if, I think companies need to be more systematic rather than reactive. Unfortunately, in this world, people like to react and again like to chase those bright and shiny objects. But again, the whole this is what if. So we talk about a maturity model, and usually it's a framework designed to help institutional leaders assess their practice process or maturity. Kind of pretty straightforward. Here's a whole list of different maturity models that I researched and found. And this was a list from back in 2015 when I first did this presentation. There's probably newer ones. That's what I want to ask you. Which of these maturity models have you seen in your organizations? Or is there another one?
AI literacy maturity and just general AI maturity, deployment maturity.
Ah, okay.
I'd be surprised if there's not one for environmental stuff. I know there's the ISO was a 14,000 series about environmental stewardship. So I'm surprised not to see something like that here.
No, again, I didn't ask. I didn't go to ChatGPT and ask me what are the new maturity models out there, but I wanted to, again, ask the audience what are the ones in there. But these are the kind of the ones that, even a social, how much you're using social media. That was pretty interesting. Again, these maturity models are often written, but then never really used because again, people are chasing the next thing. It's
Well,
like
they often have different names, like in Six Sigma, for example, there's, a green belt, a brown belt, and a black belt, and then there's a master black belt. So it's a different type of maturity model, but it's based on levels of competence.
yeah, that's a good. I forgot about the Six Sigma one. Yeah, that's another good one. And isn't there some kind of maturity model in the quality space? There's other quality maturity model, Vance. You're in that space.
So there's a sequence of performance improvement facilitation that goes yellow belt, green belt, black belt, master black belt, and that sort of translates into a maturity of projects, which leads or correlates to a sequence of project, program, and portfolio management models for change. So it's kind of sequenced that way in our world.
Okay, that's good to know that there's different accomplishments and levels. Again, how much the models adopted, tells again if how much it can be recognized. Because this one that I'm sharing today, not sure it's really ever been adopted. I presented it 10 years ago, but I haven't found any organizations that are actually using it. Now, again, probably I didn't do a good enough job publicizing it year after year and such. It was just out there and like, all right, that was fun. I'm on to the next thing. But so here's the performance improvement maturity model. It determines where a learning organization is on the growth curve from training to performance improvement. And again, it defines the attributes, behaviors, and characteristics of each level of maturity. If you could put the link to the handout, it has all the different levels in there, and we'll be kind of going through those right now, and then give you a chance to use that scorecard to evaluate some different organizations. So it started off as a having 5 different levels: recognize, understand, manage, mastery, and optimize. And looking and reflecting on it, 5 levels was like way too many. And I really couldn't find and didn't recognize any organizations at the optimized level. Maybe back in 2015, there were a few, but I haven't seen any since then. So it was kind of like, let's kind of simplify this model into 4 things. Again, back in 2015, I was kind of really optimistic that there were optimized organizations. I think they're kind of unicorns. There might have been some in the past, and we'll think about what that would actually kind of look like and stuff but we'll come back to that. So the first level is kind of is recognized. It's usually, again, a training department. They're seen as a training department. They're usually detached from the business. They're maybe even part of HR, kind of definitely siloed. They do smile sheets about how people much like the training, completion rates. They're very reactive. They do realize that training doesn't always work, but they're not really good at figuring out, well, maybe we should do something else. There's often inconsistent processes. Every new training development starts from scratch and nothing's repeated. Not a whole lot of looking back at what worked, what didn't. Lots of refresher training, maybe lots of generic training, as Marcia said, little value add. Each of these these levels do have some of the ISPI standards. So maybe they're focusing on results or outcomes, but the results are mainly just completion. And in this kind of case, they're starting to work in partnership with clients and stakeholders in standard 4. So, but we'll see in through this that you really become more mature the more the standards you're using as an organization. The next one is understand. So they're kind of moving up. You're realizing that we need to do things differently, a little bit better. So there's some actually discovery attempts to find out what's really going on. Maybe a needs assessment to see if the training is really is training really needed here. You're trying to actually then attempt whatever solutions you're creating to outcomes. And that's that important add value standard. And you're also, I think one of the good analogies, you're seeing the shape of the iceberg beneath the water. There's something going on here that the department's coming to you with, but you're realizing there's a lot of things that impact the learning. You're starting to again, this kind of organization is asking, why is this training needed? That's always a key question. Asking that, identifying the current state. What are people struggling with? What are people not doing that? Obviously, they're trying to consider a future state. So that's really taking that systemic view. And they're maybe doing a little bit of analysis to consider the factors. Why is there a gap between this current and future state? It's like, again, kind of the starting of performance consulting. There's some process repetition, and you have clarifying I think a key thing I've seen with organizations, you figure out who does what, internal roles. You're not having generalists. You're starting to have people that are really looking at stuff. And so that's kind of the understand level. Then it kind of goes up into the level 3, which is the manage. And now you're still having the discovery attempts and needs assessment. Wait a second, the slide's wrong. Well, I'll just describe. I'm missing a manage slide here. Sorry about that. But on the handout, the manage slide, a variety of interventions. You're actually using some change management strategy. You're actually starting to ask, what is success? You're actually, working on a strategy to execute all on standards. I think by this time in manage, you have you really have a seat at the table, and you probably by this time have an elevator speech, so you can explain what you do and how you're different from a training department where you're actually there. your elevator speech that I use is, we try to improve business outcomes through training and non-training solutions. So I think this is the managed levels a little bit more mature. And then the final level is the kind of the mastery, and the top of the key thing is now rather than you going to the business, the partners are coming to you with the big problems, or now you're recognizing problems before the business does. You're using business metrics. You actually have a succession plan so that your heroes, the people that started this, when they move away, the whole thing doesn't fall apart. I've seen that with lots of organizations that were maybe at the mastery level, but then their heroes and CPTers left, and it all fell apart. And again, by this time you have key standards so that when people do leave, new people can come in and keep the performance improvement maturity going. Again, I think the key what performance consulting is, and it's valued. And there's probably a skepticism to bright and shiny things, because oftentimes I would see that I wouldn't see a mastery organization chasing these bright and shiny things. They'd be kind of asking, what gap does this close? What do you expect to happen from these kind of things? And then by this time, this group is doing the last key ones of making sure that these solutions are conforming and feasible, and they're actually evaluating the results and impact. So they, back in 2015, there were a few organizations these were the organizations that were often at ISPI and winning ISPI awards. And I'd say that's probably a one out, winning an ISPI award, that probably gets you to level 3 of manage. But if you're winning these year after year and presenting at ISPI, you're probably at that mastery level. But again, I've been to a lot of ISPI conference, and there's a lot of one and dones. And so trying to find those organizations that are at the mastery level is not very often. So I took some of the behaviors that were in optimize and put them here in level 4.
So Scott,
any questions or comments about these different levels?
yeah, I jumped up already. So here, as we go through these levels, but particularly at the mastery level, I'm wondering, is there space here for an organization to continue to self-assess? Because mastery once achieved is, that's not permanent, right? You got to nurture that. You got to see if you're there. There's entropy works, right? So you won't stay there without a concerted effort. So I'm wondering if that really should be an indicator that you have mastery, is that you as an organization are reinforcing and checking to see, are you still doing the things, what got you here isn't necessarily what's going to keep you here.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's probably a good point to have on this as a custom, is that self-reflection of those things. I hadn't thought about that. I had a culture of improvement, but usually that's a culture of improvement within the entire company. But again, I think what you're saying is, being able to assess how well did we do performance improvement this year, and how can we do it a little bit better next year? Again, it's really rare for performance improvement organizations to actually look at their own performance, because they're always measured by the outcomes for the company. But I think that is a good sign of an organization. Any other questions or comments?
This actually sounds more like a learning organization maturity, learning performance maturity model. And I think it's missing the number 5, which is produces outcomes that produce ROI.
Yeah, it could be doing that. It'd be interesting to work with Jack Phillips and see what organizations are trained and certified on ROI and then actually doing it. So that'd be an interesting one. I have to talk to them sometime.
Achieving it is an important part. That's where the learning organizations fail. People don't get tangible results from what they do.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting one to add to that. And again, that's kind of the goal of this is to a model is just a model to figure out, hey, what does this have and what is it missing? So the use of ROI is an interesting one that I could probably add to that level because again, it's not something you would do on every project, but having that would be a good thing.
Maybe ROI is, see, I guess the way I think about it, what the training department should be doing is focusing on impact that has some kind of result. Okay. So that's the pre-level. Uh, the level above that are business accomplishments. In other words, linking the training activity to something important to the business. So doing leadership development is sort of important to the business, but generally, people don't measure whether it made the leaders effective or not. So leadership effectiveness would be a more measurable outcome, but that's a big problem in learning organizations. They don't take that
Yeah.
next step.
Yeah, that ROI of leadership development programs. I we had probably 4 or 5 years ago a speaker who presented her ROI case study, and it was for a leadership development program about coaching. And found out they had a negative ROI, but they learned that you know that people didn't actually implement it. So of course it didn't. It had some people that actually implemented it got business results, but very few did. So they were kind of the organization was not surprised by the negative ROI, but they said, hey, if we could fix these things, maybe we can get a positive ROI. So it's one of those kind of cases that even programs that don't have ROI, you can
But
learn
but
to
I
address
I
those
think
barriers. But yeah, I think you're right though that most organizations aren't doing that. It
I
takes
think you
somebody to
have to
drive
set
that.
an expectation for learning departments and indeed other departments to at least produce business impact. Whether you can measure the ROI for the organization is doubtful because there are too many other variables going on. But if you deploy a Six Sigma project, for example, and it produces a result that the business wanted. Usually with a Six Sigma project, there's an executive who sponsored it who wants a problem solved. And so the outcome is you did something to contribute to the solution or you solved the problem.
So is that more about anecdotal evidence than necessarily
It,
quantitative?
it, I, Anecdotal is a form like it's weak impact. It's not weak ROI. It's just weak impact. If it's anecdotal, you don't really know whether you had that effect.
Right, but I guess the challenge to me is and I agree with you. It's hard to say that I've had that like the L&D department or whatever whoever's responsible for performance improvement say that tracing a measurable impact, trying to get an ROI or stuff like that's super challenging because exactly like you said, there are so many other contributing factors, you know. But so what is it that what would be an example, I think, of demonstrating value? And I'm not sure, Irwin, if you're going like if you say, well, I can do it on a per project basis or or per division or per supervisor, stuff like that. So I'm kind of curious what there would be. And I've been struggling with, just as a quick sidebar, I've worked for a very long time, in the nonprofit world, and it's really hard to say that, this nonprofit organization made this person's life better. Well, they may have improved it somehow, they've contributed to it, but there was so many environmental factors, including that decision whether or not they're, the recipient
Well,
plays, right? So
so a simple, well, a simple in a learning department context, if if attendee wants to be able to become reasonably proficient in Excel, they go to a course or a level 1 or level 2 course in Excel. they go back to the workplace, do they apply that excel in that capability in the workplace? So what we used to do for leadership development is try to collect some information several weeks after the course, or even 2 months after the course, and ask the manager, the employee went to a course and they did this. Do you see that evidenced in their performance at work? At least that's at least a grab of some impact. Giving them a before and after test at the beginning and end of training doesn't tell you whether it ever got used outside of class.
Right, right. You're actually getting somebody who's got different, different skin in the game to assess the significance
Yeah.
of what was provided.
All right, great. Let's I did hold on here. Share. Here was the manage. I got the wrong slide table. Um, some of the things in manage, they're actually attending conferences, learn best practices. They're asking what's success. They're trying to actually use all the ISPI standards. So you're getting closer to winning an ISPI award. To win an ISPI award, you have to demonstrate a project that you used all 10 standards. I won one of the awards back in 2013, my first project, and I won, and I thought that was easy. And I've submitted several since and not one. So I was like, it's harder than you think to win one of those ISPI awards showing all 10 standards. And it's again, if you're planning on winning an award, make sure you follow those 10 standards is some of my advice to you. So, and I think on the management level, you have a good toolkit to make sure that, again, you're doing the same things over and over again. And then again, moves to, which is like the mastery. And I like that idea of really showing some outcomes and stuff. So let's kind of use some PIM in use here. So read this scenario and then let me know you think where it would be on this scale. What do you think, Mark? Where would this fit on the scale? This organization.
Getting whiplash. I'm going back and forth between this and the cheat sheet.
Okay.
The description.
Well, that's why you have a second monitor. That's why I said that's what.
And I'm using every little bit of it here. It sure looks a lot like recognize. There's a little bit of analysis going on, so maybe creeping into understand.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I saw on that one, and
I saw recognize. I didn't go to the next one because I didn't say analysis only because I don't know if they've done analysis or they're just making an observation based on what they've seen, but they haven't really done any work to say, yes, this is it. So they recognize it's the issue, but I think they're falling into the trap of what a lot of companies do. They recognize and then they assume instead of doing the analysis to make a better decision.
Yeah, and they kind of have a limited toolbox. I think that's one of the things that I see in this scenario is all their solutions are training. They're not looking at any of the other enablers and factors that impact performance. They think everything can be solved with training. Maybe they're somewhat successful in that, and that's why I said no. The very few non-training interventions.
Right. Yeah. So and it's interesting because I going back and I've been reading and rereading the first sentence, here in the scenario, and then going back to because at first I was excited. So partners with the business and determines if. So seeing if there as opposed to executing the demand for structural led training, et cetera, whatever. But I do notice that on your model here that at least you realize that training may not always be the solution. Still fits with that recognized level, but it's still you know for this stuff. It's actually a fairly exciting statement.
Yeah. Again, there's some hints there. They're like, oh, we want to do more performance improvement, but we don't mean maybe we don't even know how to get there. That's kind of the key thing. That's a lot. And a lot of times organizations, I've seen they're like, oh, we want to do performance improvement. We just don't know how to get there because we're so busy building stuff, you know, building all this training. Or back to my pet peeve, chasing bright and shiny objects. Instead of trying to identify outcomes. And I think that's my next question on all these scenarios is what could the organization do to move up to understand? And I think it's like kind of working as Irwin said many times, identify outcomes. What do you the so what? What's the value in here? That's the key thing. But so many organizations don't even think to do that. All right, let's take a look at scenario 2 and try to figure out where you think they fit on this scale. All right, I'll call on Irwin. What do you think this would fit this organization?
I think it's somewhere between recognize and understand myself.
How come? Tell us.
But because I see, here's my problem. There on your list on the handout, there are a lot of actually concrete things, but you're mixing together training department practices with the performance practices. So if you think of just three major categories, starting with understand, and manage, and to some degree mastery, but understand, manage. That's the preparation skills you need to have in order to have a chance of having some level of impact. Once you have those skills, then you can kind of move to mastery where you're partnering to get outcomes, use business metrics and all of that. Uh, um, so you're kind of think of it like a consulting model, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other stuff is just the recognize is sort of irrelevant to me.
Yeah.
That's just not. It's like you're not there yet, basically.
Yeah. No,
And
that's.
and
Mhm.
so I would relabel these really is uh, preparation would be understand and some degree um, manage. Uh, Mastery is kind of what you have there, and then I'd add another cell which would be outcomes or results.
Mhm.
And that's really what's expected of learning departments. People don't, you know, they don't care about real ROI from the learning department because, as Mark said, there's just all these other factors, good manager, bad manager, that affect whether the learning turns into any kind of outcome. So, and once they've spent the money on the training, they don't care. It's like it's a sunk cost. They got to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So I think if you just reframed it a little bit, it would be a much stronger performance related maturity model.
No, thanks. That's good. That's good feedback from somebody with your expertise and experience. That's always that's what's great about these presentations is the contributions from the attendees. Yeah, this one, this one's I thought it was a little bit more on the understand because like okay, they're kind of in that preparation one, but you're right, they're still doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Like there's no real mentions of outcomes in here. How can they be at managed level without outcomes? That's kind of the key
Yeah,
one, or results. I think that's the key thing. If they can come up with results, just because you can speak the language, you know, you're moving up there, but they don't have those kind of key war stories, and they're not even sure they're asking what is success.
the other
So,
thing I would recommend for your list is to
mhm.
begin with a verb instead of put it at the end. Some do and some don't, but if you consistently turned it into a verb for each item, uh, it would be much more clear to people what the structure is.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Any other comments or what you thought this group would be on the maturity model? All right. Here's a real company that I used to work with, and I don't even know. I'd like to be interested to know where you guys think this one would fit.
Just for clarification, these are internal learning consultants because as
Yeah,
external consultants, I feel right at home with this.
yeah. No, these were people that called themselves learning consultants. They met with the business, but yeah, I was like, huh, this is interesting. You guys got your learning consultants, really? Huh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and going back to Irwin's comments on the labeling here. What would the one before recognize be?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what I mean, I said this isn't really anywhere. This isn't even recognized. I'm not even trying to perform. This is like
Should be
I think this
shows
is
up.
this is
I
well,
think lip service would be this level.
and what I really determined was this was vendor management. They weren't learning consultants. They were vendor managements because so yeah, so I was on the GP strategies and we were one of the vendors and I was trying to sell them on learning analytics and they couldn't answer me any of these questions. Like, what are the outcomes are if we implement this stuff? If we spend this money, what do you hope to get at it? It's like, well, the business gets to spend their budget. It was like, you mean they're not held accountable for the $500,000 they're given for learning every year? No, they're just everybody gets $500,000, and then we work with them to figure out how to spend it. I'm like, wow, what an interesting organization that has that much money to waste on learning technology. And this was a group that actually had 2 or 3 different LMSs because different lines of the business decided they could use their money to buy an LMS. Of
Well,
course, I
a
asked.
lot of those groups are selling LMSs and they're putting ribbons around it, you know.
Yes, and I was just, when I started with this company, they said, I got to meet with them and find out, hey, we're not gonna fund your technology anymore. And they're like, well, what can we do? What other technology can we use then? I'm like, are you using? What do you tell me what you're doing with the technology now? And of course, they implemented it, but never followed through with stuff. So it was pretty easy to find cheaper or existing solutions that because we told them we're not going to fund your technology anymore. But again, usually the person that implemented the technology was already gone. They were tasked with the business. They were in the business line, tasked with implementing this new learning technology. They implemented it, got the promotion, and then we're gone, and then handed it off to somebody else who didn't know why we had it. So it was very frustrating. So yeah, this is a scenario where they're not even on this because it's vendor management. But Yeah, this was a strange organization that I was on both sides of us of working with and trying to get them to do evaluation. All right, here's another one, and I want you to figure out where you think this one would be.
That's like manage, I think,
Why do you say that?
because they're delivering a product the customer wanted, so there's an alignment with the customer at some level, but there's no real mastery of getting results and all of that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't get a chance to read it, but based on your comment, um, that it sounds like, even though for me, sometimes the customer asks you for something, but there are times when the customer really doesn't know what they want. And even if you give them what they want, sometimes it does not meet what the end goal was. So I don't know if this is sort of it, but sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I find that to be true.
Yeah. So I tried to describe how we're doing things at the Coast Guard. This is kind of, they've won quite a few HPT awards, and way back when I was a performance consultant, I was like, oh, I want to work for the Coast Guard. They're at the mastery level of performance improvement. They're doing all the stuff, they're winning awards and all that kind of stuff. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. Well, then I get there and it's just like, well, we do a lot of analysis and we do a lot of this stuff and a lot of good standardized processes, SOPs, and all that kind of stuff. But what's the number one thing is, everybody, this is how many people we trained every year. And I'm like, what's exactly the alignment between the training and the business outcomes of the Coast Guard? And it's like, we have people that can do things. And I'm like, so, and so, and then again, the Coast Guard's often got distracted by chasing bright and shiny objects, AI or AR and VR and different things like that. And so the Coast Guard's, you know, um, not quite there. I think it's again kind of at the managed level, and I think it goes back to what I think was Irwin or Mark. The Coast Guard really isn't taking a look to see how can we do things better. They're just trying to kind of answer the mail and keep up with every new commandant's big priorities. So again, being reactive to what the commandant wants, rather than taking, well, how can we connect what the commandant wants to actual outcomes? Stepping away and providing that expertise. So it's still a pretty good organization to work with on being in the managed side, but it's not. Again, I don't see the Coast Guard working to go to the mastery. And I think one of the other key questions we don't ever ask is, what problem are we solving? Often when we do ask that, they often say we don't have training. That's the problem. Like, people in the Coast Guard are really smart at figuring out how to do things without training. We have enough SOPs and metrics and other stuff that people, if there isn't a training course, they still figure out how to get it done. So now it may not be done the same ways, but that's some of the issues. So that's where I had it on this one too. All right, your organization. Describe an organization you've worked with or current state, and then the rest of us will try to figure out where it would fit in on this. On this.
So currently, I'm not in training right now. So what I do on the team that I manage is I do a combination of things. So the first thing that I did when I got there is I identified that they did have a sort of like an SOP for what they were doing, but the SOP was just a list of words and it was missing pieces and parts. So what I did is I revamped the training manual or the job guides. I gave them a mixture of
hands-on, do it on your own. And then the way that it's measured is when it's time to do that particular task, how much of it did you get correct? So on a small scale, that's where I am. And then as we go through, I will adjust the guide based on how effective it was at teaching that particular thing. So that's where I am. Hello?
Yeah. So what part do you think, based on what are you doing any analysis?
So the analysis at the end is the determination of how well were they able to do the task. So if I said that you had to create and issue this particular paper, how well were you able to do that based on all the things that came first? And that's the analysis, is to look at it over a certain period of times that they did it to determine how well it was or how effective the training was.
Okay. Where do you think that, based on a little bit of brief description of the organization, where do you think Marcia's would fit?
That it seems, extrapolating wildly from a few words there, you know, certainly in the understand realm, leaning into manage. I mean, just you see things like we've changed the job aids. We're measuring, it's number of behaviors implemented. That's still pretty low level stuff, but there are efforts. I look at this as there are efforts going on that could be built upon, not necessarily, destroyed. And let's do it right this time. It's like, these look like decent steps with good potential for growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to understand. It's like I like that they're looking at the task. The next to get to manage is like what do these tasks lead to, and how do these tasks impact the business? That's kind of the bigger picture to get to a little bit higher level. But thanks, Marcia.
You're welcome. Thank you for
somebody else who want to describe your learning organization or an organization you've been part of. We'll try to figure out where it would fit in this.
This is Vance. I worked for an organization. It was actually called the Human Performance Center in the Navy. The underlying model that we used was the Human Performance Improvement model, and the way it was structured was they hired in a wide variety of professional at the master's and PhD level, professional operators who were interested in solving problems in a number of different ways. So they put a group of people, they called them a detachment, in 35 learning centers around the Navy. And these detachment operators would interact directly with the client to hear about a problem, and then they would raise that problem internally to the organization, and then the organization would make every effort to get the right discipline professional assigned to that project, regardless where in the United States they were located. That way, regardless of what gap we came up with between the actual and the desired performance, we had access to a professional who was well versed in solving that particular issue and could draw on the expertise of others from other disciplines to help solve that. So although we use the HPI model or the HPSM, as our underlying model. We delved into program and project management, change management, risk management, business process reengineering, continuous performance improvement using Lean Six Sigma tools, and a number of organizational change models to help solve problems. That was the most comprehensive organization that would intentionally throw the necessary resources at a problem. And the wonderful thing about it was the client didn't pay for it, which was an interesting model. That's why it no longer exists now. But that was the organization I was part of.
Huh. Fascinating.
So how did the client not pay for it?
So all the practitioners, all 150 of us, we were Navy civilians, and we were independently funded as a experimental command for a period of 5 years, and we were embedded within learning centers throughout the Navy. So the Navy, the learning centers did not pay our salaries, travel costs, or time or resources or anything. We were all centrally funded, and that's why I say that the client, the people who had the problem, didn't pay for it. What was interesting was the people who screamed the loudest got the service, and then those that realized, wow, that's really a great idea, but they didn't get on board right away. They found out when the organization went away that those resources were no longer available.
So and I don't know if I heard, what was the outcome? What was the success?
Well, it was an experiment to see if a diverse set of consultants could solve problems of any existing nature, and it worked very well, but it was not well. It was not funded in a sustaining manner. So the vision was that the host organizations would start to pick up the tab after 5 years, and you know about the milk and the cow. The organizations didn't want to pick up the tab.
Even though they solved problems that probably saved money and time, it didn't have the ROI in it. That probably sounds part of it.
So the ROI couldn't be assessed to a single entity because the resources came from such a wide variety of places.
Yeah, that's true.
So do you think if the ROI was considered up front, would that conversation been able to have been had, and then the organization could have remained viable?
So the ROI wasn't assessed by the central command. The vetting was done by the central command as far as resource requirements, but not the ROI, because we could not recoup any of the savings that was realized by the client.
Okay.
And I think that's an important piece, because we talk about performance improvement, and I think that with this session we're doing here, that's one of the factors that as we're doing these different levels, that we don't think of that ROI early enough to measure it, to make the case of viable and sustainability.
I totally agree. This model, by the way, is currently in use by most of the major consulting firms in the world. The larger consulting firms have a wide variety of source disciplines to tap into, and they've made a very good business about diversifying their product lines. Anyway, that was just my experience.
Yeah, based on the model, ooh, I think it's almost on the managed side of it, because it's a variety of solutions that are training and non-training. It could be a process improvement thing. I think that's pretty interesting. However, as we've the key thing it's missing, and Irwin's always brought up, is results. What are exactly the outcomes? The problem was solved, but what were the results of that problem being solved? Was those actually being measured? And so that's always kind of the key question. But it's an interesting kind of thing. And maybe it's not to manage because they don't have a really good story to keep it going. That's just it. If you don't have those good stories and can't sell your team of consultants, then it often goes away. So what happened to all those professionals? Did they get other jobs in the Navy, or what happened to them, Vance?
So some were hired right as soon as the organization imploded. Some of them were hired immediately by their host organizations to do similar types of work, but most of them got external consulting jobs outside the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the air traffic controller. You don't ask what the ROI of the air traffic controller is. You ask, do they have a level of competence or proficiency to prevent crashes? And think of all the things that have to go into that, including attentiveness and all sorts of things, so you don't, direct a truck into an aircraft that's landing and so forth. So it's not an ROI issue, it's a performance issue. Some people have to have a level of mastery that's beyond everyday levels for certain kinds of work. I had a team of professionals in my learning organization when I was at Douglas Aircraft at Metropolitan Water District, where we were all called upon to solve problems. We didn't know what the problem was going to be when we were invited in by an executive or a division leader. It's like I want to streamline my organization. I want to. We don't have a skill set. We're not hiring enough people with electrical, mechanical skills to work to run the organization that produces the water. So help us with that. So we did some research. We put together an apprenticeship program, and it was a 4-year program, 90% on the job learning. And at the end of it, those people could perform as a journey level technician. Those are the ways that we demonstrated the impact of our learning organization. They wanted a new performance management process. Uh, I interviewed a bunch of executives. I got them to buy into the different approaches. I gave, about 8 briefings to them on the new process before they agreed to it. So there's all this mastery stuff you have to have in order to have impact. But the impact takes many different kinds of forms. It's not just ROI. It's did you deliver what the customer asked for? Did you exceed what the customer asked for? Did you help them see they were asking for the wrong thing? All of those things are proficiencies that learning people, if they're effective, have to have.
Yeah, you make a good point. Sometimes it says of ROI, it's return on expectations. What was success, and did we achieve that? It may not be exactly a dollars and cents or something you can do that way, but that's the key. The key thing. It sounds like those are good. All right, Irwin. you probably have lots of other organizations, but again, um, through all your different companies you worked for, why don't you describe one of yours and we'll figure out where it fits on the scale. You kind of just described the one you did at the Metropolitan Water. Do you have another one?
Sure, Boeing. I was
Yeah.
Douglas. I was McDonnell Douglas Aircraft, and till we merged, and then I was Boeing.
So tell
But
us about that, your organization there.
so we had about when I joined, we had about 19,000 people, and we were asked to deploy a process improvement methodology through the whole organization. Before I joined the group, they had done an analysis of the problems in the organization. They did a systematic study of what are all the problems in this aircraft organization, and they grouped them and they fell into two piles. Pile one was there were problems with customer satisfaction. The external customers were unhappy about a lot of things. The internal customers weren't happy about a lot of things. For example, the engineers might design space in building an aircraft for a wrench. They didn't design the space for the hand holding the wrench and turning the wrench. So we developed a solution where we put engineers and production people in a design for manufacturability training course to get them to understand each other's problems. So we did a lot of things like that, but with the customer satisfaction issue, that was one problem. The second problem was there was a lot of rework, wasted materials. The external customer received airplanes that weren't put together fully correct, or they delivered them with scratches. So there was rework that caused, and that caused customer dissatisfaction. So we put together a program that we ended up deploying with, by then, 22,000 people that kind of use some of the ideas that Gary Rumbler talks about frequently. Sort of understand your customer needs, understand that help your supplier deliver the right things you need to be effective, and understand the processes and measure the processes that you need to have to produce the work. And that was a big success. And our measure was the executives believed it helped turn around the company. I'm giving you the short version, of course, but
Yeah. Oh, that gives us enough kind of things. All right, Mark, what do you think this would fit under the performance improvement maturity model?
Well, results matter. So, turn around the company, mastery, self-defined. Um, yeah. Uh, but as you dig through this, and listen to what Irwin is saying, it certainly seems like it's they're the top end of the scale there. Um,
Yeah, that's what I was starting to look at. Partners come with the big problems. It's like, oh, it's all about
right.
customer satisfaction, internal and external. I think that's one of the categories I had in that attribute is that. And, trying to, yeah, there was some training solutions, but they were really about some bigger things. And again, they were looking at, gee, Gary Rumler and the white space and those kind of key things. I think that was really interesting and it was across the organization rather than just one little segment, paint or engines or whatever it is. So that's pretty interesting. What was this? What was this program called, Irwin?
it's called Satisfy Your Customers with First Time Quality.
Okay. So did people did people think it was a quality program or just what did people
Well,
think the program
it
was?
was a program. It was generally I was part of the quality management group at that time. And it was a program that the analysis of what the executives wanted the company to improve. And they turned to us and said, figure out what's going on. and
Hmm.
fix it. And we came up with a fix and we deployed it. It had measurement, timeliness and quality and so forth. And it was just very impactful. And in 2 years, we did a lot of things, and we deployed this thing in 2 years. We trained 200 facilitators in the company because we couldn't do it all ourselves. So we had to have people help the managers deploy this process in their organizations and so forth. Uh, but the key thing is if you can connect it to a customer. I was lucky. I got to work with top level customers, but before I was working top level stuff, my team was already solving problems. Before I even got there, my team was solving problems because they built a reputation as people who could figure out how to solve the problem. And that brand that most of the individuals had got them the work that helped them solve the problem.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. And the more I've been in this performance improvement space, the most successful performance improvement organizations are not in learning or HR. They're somewhere else. They're in quality or they're in somewhere else within the organization, or they're again, like even Vance said, they're kind of a standalone center of excellence. Those kind of key things. Unfortunately, a lot of like the Coast Guard, it's under training, it's under FORCECOM. It could be somewhere else, but um, I think those people that are in about solving problems, that's the best place for performance improvement of these models to be. But there really isn't an organism in the org chart or group for solving problems. I think it's everybody's job, which means it's nobody's job.
Well, learning organizations generally have two sets of things they deliver. Typically, you have 6 or 8 functions in the organization. They're all on different cycles, they have different needs. And so when they say, we need our people trained in Excel, you don't have the resources to train every single function in a unique Excel program unless you have a larger budget. So you put together a schedule of courses and you make them available at different times and you repeat them and that sort of thing. That's a typical basic learning structure. When that became too slow, we deployed LinkedIn Learning. LinkedIn Learning had a library that covered most of the conceivable topics that we would be asked for in the organization. And that turned out to be a valuable resource for a number of people, just not everybody, because they were busy doing their work and they didn't have time for learning. And so then what we started doing is bringing in little 10-minute micro learning sessions that said, oh, you want to learn how to use mail merge in Word? Here, here's the session. We gave them a list of choices so they could see on their own how they could develop those things. So you just have to be nimble and be able to understand how to understand what's really going on in the organization. And the way you do that is by building relationships with your customers so they trust you as a valuable resource. When I first came into the company in the human factors group, I was hired because of my PhD background in cognitive psychology. And first day at work, my boss said to me, if you're going to have any credibility with the pilots and the flight engineers you're going to be working with, you're going to have to learn how to fly a DC-10 and building the MD-11 airplane. And I went, okay. And I did a lot of stuff to be able to fly the simulator and understand talk pilot talk with the pilots and the flight engineers. That was just to get me in the door. So that's what a lot of learning departments miss is they don't build up the capabilities of their people at a level that customers want to work with them. and that they can solve the customer's problems in a way that the customer says, go work with that person. They really are good at solving problems. And that's why that's why I said there's a preparation stuff. In my case, I had to have a PhD to get that job in cognitive psychology. A PhD in a different field wouldn't have done it. But but again, if you regroup that a little bit and put it into a verb form and think like, what's it take to get ready to consult with the customer? And then when you consult with the customer, how are you going to get an outcome that's of value to the customer and maybe to the organization as well? So those are my 2 cents on it.
Oh no, thanks. That's great. Well, we come to the kind of the end of the presentation, and one of my favorite David Merrill things is integration. And so, kind of my challenge to you guys is think about what's one thing I can use from this performance improvement maturity model tomorrow. Is it something to assessing my own organization? But just kind of be thinking about that, because as we know, if we don't revisit this, we'll forget about it. What am I going to do? I'm probably going to make some changes to it based on the feedback from this presentation tonight. Change some of the categories, change it around. Because if I don't, somebody will come and ask me, hey, can you present this maturity model? And I got to keep changing it based on the feedback I've gotten from you guys. So thanks again so much for that. And I like that, changing it maybe again to either the verbs or the nouns. I'm not sure which one, but it's always fun to kind of change the categories up to make them reflect more performance improvement. So I think that's, interest. Thanks for that feedback today. We'll send out the deck and the handout when this recording's published, right, Mark?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you, Scott.
If you have,
Yeah, let me go ahead,
if
Marcia.
you have the link that you had put in the chat, if you could send that to me, I'll add it to the website, because I put the link to the Zoom on the website also.
Okay. Thanks. That'd be great. Yeah,
there's a link to your handouts too.
Okay. Yeah, we'll probably just include the handout and the slide in the email out, right, Mark? As we usually normally do.
Yeah.
You have both of them. And I made a PDF of the slides for those kind of things, so people can follow and find on that one. Thanks again, Vance. Thanks for everybody for participating. Your again, a presentation is all based on the attendees thing. It's a small but mighty group that provided some great stories. Thanks again, Vance and Marcia and Irwin, for your good examples. Next time I do this presentation, I could do this scenario. And hey, I heard about this organization. It was at this level. So it's always good to collect and hear different ones, because it's always good to have people just again describe their organization and then trying to figure out where it fits in this. So again, thanks for your insight this evening.
Thanks, Scott. Well worthwhile presentation.
Thanks.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Good night.